This summer's headlines were dominated by a Kuwait fire that claimed the lives of 50 people in June and a high-rise in Qatar that went up in flames in July. Amid all this drama, the National Fire Protection Association last week joined forces with the Saudi Electricity Company as a step towards ensuring fire safety standards and practices as the kingdom gears up for rapid urbanization as part of Vision 2030. While there are over 300 codes and standards that bodies like NFPA have drafted, many of these are just nice to have and aren't mandated by governments. And even if there are regulations in place, they aren't enforced. AGBI spoke to Jim Pauley, president of NFPA, to find out more.
Often it may not be the regulation, it may actually be the application of the regulation that needs to have more enforcement that's associated with it. That's typically what we see. Often there are regulations in place, and the question is, what's the enforcement mechanism to be able to carry that through? And so one of the things that we're trying to do in Saudi Arabia is to ensure that we have a very robust training program that can be able to bring people in, be able to train them on these systems so that you can follow all the way through. I think what will go along with that is the need for important enforcement of the regulations that they put in place. How rigid those are, I think, has a lot to do with what those discussions are between government and the developers.
One example of a code becoming a law is the UAE prohibiting the use of aluminium composite cladding that are known to be highly flammable in 2017. For context, flammable cladding was blamed for the spread of the infamous Grenfell Tower fire in London in 2017 and Dubai's Address Hotel and Torch Tower fires in 2015. While most of the new buildings don't use this cladding material, the ones constructed before 2017 would need to be retrofitted to remove or replace it, which could be costly.
Now the challenge is, it goes back to one of your earlier questions about what do I do with all of the buildings that have this cladding that's on them? And I think a lot of countries are wrestling with that question right now is, do we go in? I know they're wrestling with this in the UK and what the costs are to go in and remove all of that cladding from the existing buildings. And then, who funds that cost? Is it the owner of the building? Is it the occupants of the building? Is it government that's going to fund it? I think those questions are still being asked and trying to be figured out in a lot of these particular countries. I think the fire that we just saw not long ago, earlier this year in Valencia, Spain, was another one that was a cladding issue. Absolutely, systems and so forth have a cost associated with them in the construction project. But the cost of a human life or multiple human lives that you could lose by not taking safety into account greatly outweighs what we're talking about of any cost or investment in safety that you make up front.
In fact, the International Code Council has calculated how much money could actually be saved if appropriate building codes are incorporated.
We have a very famous example is that we say that as far as, if I remember correctly, with every $1 spent into incorporating building codes, modern building codes, $11 are being saved, down the line. From an economic perspective, from an environmental perspective, from a safety perspective, from an engineering perspective. So it's all in one bucket. Abiding to building codes or stringent building codes might be time consuming or cause project delays, but down the line, when issues arise, you go back to mitigate and to correct the problems which could have been avoided in the first place if the design criteria was, put in place.
Now, the heavy rainfall and flooding that engulfed Dubai in April this year did put a spotlight on construction quality and need for more stringent codes. More importantly, it has emphasized the need to make buildings that are equipped to deal with global warming and climate change.
If you open Dubai Building Code, you will find provisions on seismic design, for instance. Even in the there's the green construction code that requires minimum performance rating for buildings in order to achieve specific rating levels, like the istidama, like the safat systems that ranks or benchmarks building design to a specific category. in terms of green construction, in terms of energy efficiency or water conservation, and so on.